You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, everybody, welcome to Head, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So, I was actually going, where was I? I think I was like in JCPenney or something. And I ran across this shirt that's very similar to what I have on now. I have this Darth Vader shirt on that, of course, because it's a Star Wars podcast, right? And it's basically just, his helmet, like really big. That's all that's on it. And, it was cool. So I went and naturally I bought it because that's who I am. Right. It's Star Wars. So I see a cool Star Wars piece of apparel or whatever. I buy it. That's what I do. And it just dawned on me that, they have a lot of different cool stuff. So what is the coolest, Star Wars clothing? Let's go there. Let's be specific. What's the coolest Star Wars clothing that you've seen?
Clothing.
Yeah, clothing.
Let's see. I have seen a shirt that says Sith happens.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I've seen that. That's a good one.
That's a good one. Well, remember when we went to go see The Force Awakens? We actually did the whole marathon.
Oh, yeah.
And we happened to notice some very attractive young ladies walking around.
Oh, the Chewbacca onesies?
No, the R2-D2 lingerie.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yes.
No, you know what? I mean, it's kind of weird, but, those Chewbacca onesies were kind of attractive on them, too.
Well, yeah, that definitely made you want to cuddle.
Yes. Furry and soft. But, this podcast is PG.
Yes.
So I think we'll stop there, and it's time to go to the Cantina. So for, everybody that doesn't know, the Cantina is our general discussion. Basically, it could be some Star Wars news stuff, basically like a current events thing. So what's our first topic?
Our first topic is the Han Solo novels.
Yeah, now, so I don't know if you guys have clued in on this or not, but ever since the Han Solo movie came out, Solo, a Star Wars story, basically...
How original.
Yeah. Basically, what they've done is they've started to release a number of companion novels that fill in some of the gaps. One of them is called Last Shot. Now, I've been reading Last Shot, and it's actually really good because what it does is it jumps around. It takes place actually after Return of the Jedi with Han Solo and Lando, and pretty much there was a droid that Lando had that was basically trying to kill him. And he was trying to find out, okay, how did this droid, get programmed to do this? And of course he goes to Han Solo to, help him or whatever. And there's a lot of moments in the book. Like I said, I'm probably a little over halfway through it, but there's a lot of really cool flashbacks to where they'll flash back around. I think it's 10 years before the events of Solo. Or no, it's 10 years after the events of Solo.
Right.
Look it up while I'm talking about this. So, yeah, basically the novel jumps back and forth in time between the events after Return of the Jedi to events that are just after Solo. And it's really good because, like in the last podcast when we were talking about the Solo movie and how we saw different facets of Han Solo's character, stuff that we hadn't seen in the original trilogy, the amazing thing about this novel is that you really see that in one story, because you're literally seeing the older Han Solo that we're more familiar with, and then also the younger one that we were just introduced to in this new movie. It's actually really interesting because, like I said, you actually see the different characteristics of Han Solo, like who he was as a younger man and then who he had become. Because when we see him in Force Awakens, we talked about this in our last podcast when it came to Luke Skywalker and The Last Jedi and how, he had become pretty much just consumed by his failures and everything, and then he fled. Well, really, if you think about it, the same thing happened to Han Solo in Episode 7.
Yeah.
You know, he felt that he failed as a father and that he was failing as a husband.
Mm-hmm.
And he fled and went back to his former life as a smuggler.
Yeah, because that's what he was comfortable with, and that's all he knew.
Right. And so basically what we see in the last shot is we see the beginnings of that. You know, he's not quite there yet. So he basically has one foot in the hero of the rebellion that we all know, but you're starting to see the chinks in the armor, so to speak. And so it's a really, really interesting novel.
So if you just want more backstory into Han Solo, you know, check it out, you know, and just kind of see, you know, where it takes you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Check out these current Han Solo novels because, you know, in fact, I would suggest, honestly, if you really want to complete your Star Wars experience, read the novels. I mean, I would even suggest reading some of the comics, but read the novels because the current crop of novels that are considered canon, besides being extremely well written, unlike the old expanded universe, which sort of existed separately from
the movies.
Yeah, the movies and everything, and a lot of them talked about what happened after Return of the Jedi and everything else, but what Disney has worked really hard to do, and I think that they're actually successful, is that they have the movies as like their central core, and then the novels fill out, and also the comics, like everything is canon now.
Even the video games. So, you know, it really, really helps give you a complete experience. Now, yes, there are some discrepancies, as there's going to be. But, you know, like for instance, even though I didn't actually read it, I heard that at the end of the Force Awakens novel, Rey and Poe actually met. But yet in the movie, we see that they meet at the end of 8. Right.
So in that case, that would negate their meeting in 7, unless they somehow retcon that, which I doubt. But, you know, these things are going to happen because, you know, when they're doing the novels, a lot of times they'll have early drafts of scripts. And so, you know, you can't guard against all that. But they actually, for the most part, they do a really, really good job. So, yeah, if you haven't had a chance, pick up, especially if you've just recently seen the Solo movie, read these novels.
Yeah, they add a lot of backstory and a lot of color to the characters, things that they couldn't put in the movie, and you kind of get a greater and deeper sense of who these characters actually are. Absolutely.
Now, here's the thing. Speaking of the movies, because we just said that the movies are the core of, you know, everything, that everything is based around the movies. So, yeah, they're releasing novels, comic books, video games, all kinds of different companion products that further enhance the Star Wars universe and your appreciation of it. It should be noted that the movies really are the core of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only movie that we have coming up right now is Episode 9.
Right.
The question becomes, what's Disney going to do after Episode 9?
Yeah, that's the question that's on a lot of Star Wars fans' mind.
Well, especially after 8.
Yeah, for those who didn't really care for 8, as you know, unless you've been living under a rock somewhere and you're a Star Wars fan, J.J. Abrams is directing Episode 9 so far. We know,
right? Yeah,
we know Kathleen Kennedy has no problem pulling the plug.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The fact that, well, you know what? I was going to say that, but. Yeah, we'll see. If he makes it past 80% of the movie being complete, I think it's safe to say he's good.
Right. And he has a pretty great working relationship with Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, so I think he'll be okay. But I think after 9, what happens? I think that we're going to get a lot of different spinoffs. Some people have been clamoring for an Obi-Wan movie. Some people have been asking for a Boba Fett movie. And then, you know, we do have the trilogy that Rian Johnson is
still if it's still going on.
If it's still going to go on, yeah.
You know, the Obi-Wan movie's up in the air. They had basically all but canceled all the standalones, at least that we know of. I mean, I was almost heartbroken because, like we said in the last podcast, you know, both of us overall really enjoyed the Solo movie.
Mm-hmm.
we admit, okay, there were some issues, and maybe the movie didn't even need to exist, but the fact that it did, we both actually really liked it. Now, I don't know about you, but I really was looking forward to a Solo too.
Yeah, I mean, well, for Han Solo 2, I just don't know because how close they're going to bump it to episode 4. It's like, okay, where are you really going to go with him at this point? I mean, yeah, I'm sure there were other adventures. But he was
young enough, though, that...
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely capture other adventures with he and Chewie and, them going across the galaxy and being smugglers and, kind of creating a name for them. So because you still have that whole... And you do have that whole part when they talked about going to Tatooine.
Yeah.
So he's got to meet Jabba at some point.
Yeah, and that's where I think that they were going to go. And then, you have basically, the whole Darth Maul thing in there. And, where's that whole thing going to go? And there are things that you could definitely do within the context. In fact, if you wanted to do a whole Solo trilogy, I think you could have. But given the fact that the first one didn't do well
at the box office,
I think that it's safe to say that there's not going to be any future Solo films.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, depending on what Rian Johnson has planned for the trilogy, if they're still going in that direction, and then of course I guess we have to see what happens in 9 to kind of figure out what characters are left and what other stories they're going to be told. I think my hypothesis is that Rey is going to try to rebuild the First Order. I mean, not the First Order, the Jedi Order.
I hope not.
Yeah, the Jedi Order. And I think that the Knights of Ren are going to have a more pivotal, we're finally going to be able to see them because the only time we saw them was in that little flashback that Rey, or that premonition that Rey had in that, in The Force Awakens. So we really haven't seen them yet. So I think that opens a whole new door. And hopefully if that's revealed in 9, then maybe we'll delve into the Knights of Ren and how Kylo and what Kylo was doing, in between those years as he became closer to Snoke, his training with that. And maybe we'll find out some more backstory on Snoke because Leia knew who he was. She always said, Snoke, turned Kylo to the dark side. And so they had to have known who he was. And he seemed to have a bigger role in that galaxy. So... who knows? We might get some movies that actually kind of expound upon that time period.
Well, yeah, and then don't forget we also have the Benioff and Weiss film. They're supposed to be doing a whole bunch of movies. I don't remember if it was a trilogy but they've got movies that are coming out. Game of Thrones creators. Personally, I'm hoping for an Old Republic series from them.
And I think those guys would be the perfect guys to do it because they're already kind of in that world, that old, that old
exactly.
English, that kind of rustic,
I agree.
Ancient time. So, yeah, I think they would be, and they have the hottest show on television right now. So,
and then there's a Jon Favreau TV series.
Yeah,
and the reason why I bring it up, even though it's television, is because you do have movies that could actually come from that.
Yeah, spinoffs, and I would love to see. And some people even are speculating that, Ahsoka may still pop up somewhere.
Well, if you can, and that's it. Like if you were now named the head of Lucasfilm, they got rid of Kathleen Kennedy, they put Darryl Sanders, you're the new guy. I mean, besides a much needed pay raise.
Definitely.
What would you do?
What would I do?
Yeah, like what would you release now? Where will you go after 9? I mean, now, of course, I have to preface this question because I do know that you don't have the one variable that Kathleen does, which is the plot of episode 9.
Right. But let's just say I would love to see a new order. I would just love to see new crops of Jedi coming to be. I would love to see how Rey handles training up new Jedi, because with Luke being gone, I mean, essentially, he's a Force ghost, along with Grand Master Yoda, as we like to give him his proper title. But I would love to see what she would do, and creating a new order, because like Snoke said in 8, where there's darkness, there's light. And so you have to have that balance. And if Kylo makes it out of 9 and Rey makes it out of 9, then there's going to still always be that conflict somewhere. Yeah. So what's going to be the answer to that conflict? And so I think that they're both are going to be kind of breaking away, because we kind of saw that in 8 where Kylo's like, hey, let's do away with everything that we knew. Like, that's garbage. That's crap. Let's just do our own thing. And so I think that is the start of something fresh, something new. And Kylo is that type of guy. He's kind of unstable. So you really don't know where he's coming from. And I think that kind of makes an interesting dynamic, because everybody else we've seen in the Star Wars universe, as far as villains are concerned, have been more calculated, whether it's Snoke, whether it's Palpatine, those guys at the helm have been kind of calculating. But Kylo, man, that guy, he's just a ball of emotion. So anything could come out of that.
Well, all right. So what do you think, listeners? Is Darryl right? Is that what they should do?
Of course I am. There's no thought about that.
Well, here's the thing. Okay.
I'm always right sometimes.
So here's the thing. Right. So let me give now my version of what I would do. And we'll see for you guys out there. I mean, who do you agree with? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Darryl? Or do you think both of us are crazy and you have your own ideas? We'd love to hear them.
If you vote for me, I'll give you $1.
Oh, now suddenly we're going to have you're going to put us in debt. And then we'll be seeking sponsors.
GoFundMe accounts.
No, here's what I would do. I would actually do something very similar to Marvel Phase 1. I would actually say, okay, where would I like to go with the series ultimately? And then I would try to release a bunch of movies that would bring me there. Mm-hmm. Just like what Marvel did when they did Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, all that. And they all culminated in the Avengers movie. And so now you have the first Avengers movie, and that's what the events happen there, which will lead, of course, to the second. But you had another round of singular superhero movies that actually led to the second Avengers movie. And then, so it's almost like you're identifying where you're going, and then the individual standalone films are getting you there. Mm-hmm. So what I would probably do, whether it's with saga films, whether it's with the standalones, is I would figure out, what characters do I want to bring in? What older characters, or already introduced, I should say, do I want to keep? And then I would figure out what's the overall story arc, and then release movies that would actually give pieces of that puzzle that would all finally culminate in whatever the big movie is. And that's another way that we could go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's cool. I just think that, it's kind of, with Marvel, though, you kind of have the blueprint because of the comics, and everybody kind of knew that story as far as Avengers leading up to the Infinity Wars and everything like that. Like, so you could kind of, but I definitely see your point, and then that's...
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying, not exactly like that. I mean, besides, don't forget, though, that, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is quite different from the comics. Even though they do take some of the storylines, they completely warp them in such a way that it's one of the reasons why the comic book, actually, that's one of the advantages that you have in Star Wars. There is no blueprint. So what you could do is you can create this pure storyline that nobody's comparing it to anything. Well, maybe except the previous films. Mm-hmm. But you could at least... So in other words, instead of going saga, standalone, I would actually just think of, where do I want this story overall to go? If you're going to deal with the saga, that's fine. But what I would do is then the saga films would almost be comparable to the Avengers films. And then the standalones would be the ones that were like the single releases.
Okay.
See what I'm saying? So it's sort of like, okay, you have, say, episode 10. And then you'd have a bunch of standalones that would tell stories that either foreshadow or directly influence in some way episode 11. Mm-hmm. So now you have 2 points of view on this. Funny how that always works, right?
Yep.
Well, especially because we have 2 hosts. I guess that's always going to be the case. But so what do you guys think? I mean, do you think that You want to go with Darryl's plan, which is you take the characters that we have Kylo, we have Rey, and you basically continue their storylines? Or do you come up with some sort of an arc? And by the way, not that I'm retconning my own answer, but it could be with those characters. It just depends on what you want to do with them. I'm just saying have a definitive storyline and then just have a bunch of individual movies that lead up to that.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that, episode 9, because like I said, in order to get to that point, we have some characters that we already know are going to be in episode 9. That's already been confirmed, and that's Billy D. Williams.
Yes, Lando is back, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, Mr. Colt 45. And, of course, Mark Hamill, which is probably going to be a Force Ghost. And our beloved Carrie Fisher is going to be making an appearance in episode 9 as well. So what are your thoughts on these characters appearing in 9?
Well, I think, if I just take each one of these people and just give my thoughts on, which is probably the best way to do this. Billy D. Williams, it's about time. Honestly, I really thought he should have been in 7, but I do understand, the filmmakers that have actually addressed this, because J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson have both addressed this in the past about why didn't they use Lando? Mm-hmm. And it makes sense what they said, but I do think that there's a way that they could have used Lando in each of these films, and I think that they really needed to. Now, I will reserve final judgment on that, though, because I could very well see episode 9 and go, wow, I am so glad they waited till now to introduce him again into this new era of Star Wars.
Right.
So that's great. Mark Hamill, I applaud, especially JJ, because, he's notorious for being secretive.
Right.
And I am so happy that JJ actually decided to reveal Mark Hamill and didn't do this whole, is he going to be in it? Is he not going to be in it type of thing? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Mark is probably pretty happy about that too, because, he had to keep a lot of secrets about his role in 7.
Yep.
And he was a little bit freer about 8, but there were certain things. So now at least he doesn't have to deal with that. And, the question is, do you think this is going to be another one of JJ trying to correct something that Ryan did? Because, you could leave the door open that Luke did not die at the end of Last Jedi.
Well, you almost have to really explain then what happened then, because, you have the scene where you see Luke and then he disappears.
Yeah, he was tired.
Yeah, but
try projecting across the universe and see what.
I just want to project myself at work and not have to be there. But
or Hawaii. Hawaii would be good too.
Well, I actually want to be in Hawaii. I don't want to project myself. I actually want to be there.
You see, you project yourself from Hawaii.
Hawaii at work.
Yes.
See?
There you go.
But no, I think that I think Luke is gone, because even Leia and Rey both felt it, and they said it like, yeah, he's gone. And she said, like, I know. So it's like, I think.
Well, from their perspective, but yeah, I know you.
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, at this point.
No, you're probably right.
What is Luke going to do?
Yeah.
And because you have to pass that torch. It's like he can't keep being the hero now. You have new heroes. That's why you have Rey and Finn. So I think that he's definitely gone, but I think he's going to play that Obi-Wan role to Rey as a guide, as a counselor, to help her on her way, because they both kind of started roughly around the same time. Like, if you really look at their stories, because just as Luke was getting into the Force, Obi-Wan dies. So just as Rey is getting into the Force, Luke dies, or, does his cosmic thing and fades away. So, but at least it was, much like Obi-Wan, it was of his own free will in the court to go that way. It's kind of
it's sort of like a combination of Obi-Wan and Yoda's thing, because Yoda just sort of gave himself up to the Force. And that's more or less what Luke at least appears to have done at the end of Last Jedi. Now, now that we've seen Yoda,
be practically a physical being as a Force ghost. This changes the whole dynamic of Force ghosts.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe that's what Rian Johnson was setting up when, he did that, was to set up what Luke could do. Luke could actually end up being a Force ghost unlike we've ever seen. Who knows? He might even be in battles.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, and like I said, we know that he can, while he was living, he could project himself and he could be tangible.
Yeah, and, even Obi-Wan at one point said, if you strike me down, I'll be more powerful than you can imagine. Now, can you imagine how powerful Luke would be?
Exactly. And Obi-Wan
look at how powerful Luke was in life.
Right.
Imagine how powerful he is now.
Exactly. And, he's up in the upper echelon of Jedi Masters with Master Yoda. So I think that...
You think he's a Grandmaster?
I think he is. I think at that point, He
was in Legends. They haven't actually confirmed that in canon yet, but I would say he is.
Well, yeah, it would stand to reason because, one, I mean, it's kind of like he returned, if you really think about it, he returned back to his natural essence because he's the grandson of the Force.
Yeah.
So to return back to your original state.
So he's a giant midi-chlorian at this point?
Please don't say midi-chlorian.
I said the M word. I'm sorry.
The M word. But I think that's the role that Mark Hamill is going to play as Luke Skywalker in 9. I am happy to see that Billy D is coming back because I think everybody would love to see how he handles the death of Han. Because no one really has truly addressed that yet. I mean, like,
yeah, that's
Luke
true.
Kind of like, where's Han?
Well, I mean, in a way.
That. But I mean, like, no one's really, like, you really didn't see Leia grieve.
Well, they didn't have time, though. See, I'm beginning to wonder if they're all going to deal with it. Now, of course, addressing the Carrie Fisher thing, I think that it's fantastic what they decided to do, to just use unused footage from The Force Awakens. And,
And possibly The Last Jedi.
Yeah, and possibly The Last Jedi. And who knows where any of this could have come from. They could even, it's not even necessarily stuff they shot in the movie, maybe rehearsal scenes could be used. I mean, who knows what they've actually done. I mean, I think that is probably the best way. I mean, I would have accepted whatever they did, honestly. I'm glad they didn't recast her.
Yeah, that would have been hard to do.
It would have been difficult, and it would have been tough for me to accept.
Right.
And it's like for only one more movie. It's like I would almost have rather her been killed off.
And that's what I thought they did in 8. I thought when she got sucked out into space.
I know. The only reason why I didn't think that, though, was because, I take that back. Because she had actually finished all of her scenes before she passed. But being that she did pass, I thought that maybe Rian Johnson was going to go, let's just kill her off in this movie.
That he found a way to do it without hurting
the story, yeah. But that would have been a disservice to the rest of what she shot. Although, in their defense, all she was basically in a coma for half the movie, and then she comes back out. But she does have, and of course it would have robbed everybody of the Luke and Leia reunion, which this is the last time that could possibly happen now. Well, depending on how, because who knows how they're going to use this unused footage too.
Right. If she's going to communicate with Luke or...
Yeah. I mean, we assume that it could be like a hologram or something, but, who knows? I mean, with today's technology, they can interact.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that they decided to do that. I think that's really the best way to honor the characters. So I was really happy. And of course, they did... As a point of news, they did announce the rest of the cast. Most of everybody that we expected to come back are coming back.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really anxious to see, the relationship, between Kylo and Hux now. Because that's going to be an interesting dynamic between those two because they really don't like each other, but it's like they need each other. So,
well, being that it's getting close to the last call for the Cantina, I kind of like how we did that in the last episode, like our last points. What do you think as a last call type of a thing overall for all these people returning in 9?
that's obviously going to change the dynamic even between a lot of the existing characters, because obviously they're going to be using, Carrie Fisher in a different way than they intended. Because remember, this is really supposed to be her movie.
Right.
And now that can't happen. So they didn't really intend to do this, but they found a way to make it work. And then you have Billy D. Williams coming back as Lando. Yeah, Mark Hamill. But you touched on a good point, though, because you do have the dynamic between the characters of Kylo and Hux. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's going to be another villain in there?
No, I don't. I think Kylo is going to be the ultimate bad guy. I think he's eventually going to give himself into the dark. But what I feel may happen is that Rey and Kylo might actually have a battle as far as trying to gain kids for their particular order. So for Rey, for her new Jedi order, there may be some kids that she identifies that maybe Kylo wants, and they're going to have a battleground. It's almost like a draft or something like that.
Let's say, like, schools of choice over there is pretty rough.
Right. Exactly. So I think...
so your vote is Kylo's the ultimate bad guy.
Yeah, I think Kylo's going to be the ultimate bad guy. I think he's the ultimate bad guy, and then Hux is going to, of course, he's going to have to submit to Kylo, which is something he's going to hate. But I think Kylo's ultimately is going to be the ultimate bad guy, because I think with Snoke being gone, well, now what?
Well,
what about you?
I'll tell you. I didn't read the actual novelization of The Last Jedi, but I do know, I think it's The Last Jedi. It's either that or The Force Awakens. One of the two novelizations of the movies, Snoke talks about another apprentice that he had. And it makes me wonder, because, everything that, this follows is canon, and a lot of times, even when Claudia Gray was writing Bloodlines, which takes place a little bit before, the events of Force Awakens, basically, Rian Johnson actually had some input on that.
Right.
So you see that there's this cooperation. This is another thing that's different now with the novels and the movies that did not exist before, where you actually have, like, people that are involved in the movies now talking to the authors of the books. Mm-hmm. So it really makes me wonder if they're actually going to bring this mysterious apprentice of Snoke, to come out and upset everything and actually challenge Kylo.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be interesting, especially since, we don't even know who this person is or anything about them. So, but I think that would be kind of weird to bring it in at...
Yeah, I know, at the
last.
Yeah.
Unless
it sets off...
Yeah, exactly. Unless that's the setup for 10, 11, and 12 or something like that.
Or something.
So, but yeah, I think... that could be a possibility. You never know in the Star Wars universe, especially now. So, yeah.
Hey, you don't even know who's directing the movie now.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest.
Exactly.
Lots of things are a little askew in the Star Wars universe.
Definitely.
So what's our next topic? Man, I keep doing this. I did it again. I'm a bad host. Our next segment.
Yes, our next segment is Duel of the Fates.
Yeah, now just so everybody knows, again, this is a reasonably new podcast, so we probably have to, by episode 100, we don't actually have to say this anymore. But, for those of you who are just discovering us, which is basically everybody right now, our Duel of the Fates is pretty much where we debate a topic. We do a compare and contrast.
Right.
What's today's Duel of the Fates topic?
So the topic is, who's the cooler secondary character, Finn or Lando?
Ooh.
I'm going to go with Before I even answer that.
Oh, he's got to preface a statement.
Yes.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Definition of cool. Because if you're talking about just cool as far as swagger and charisma, I think
I'm going to enjoy my Diet Coke while you're actually pontificating over this.
Well, if I were Lando, I would be enjoying a Coke 45. But the thing is, Lando is cool. Like, just, he's very suave. He's very debonair, and he has that charismatic allure that a lot of women, in a lot of his movies that Billy D. Williams played, that's a big selling point for him. So, I mean, if you're talking about cool factor, I would say Lando. But if you're talking about in the essence of just, I guess if you're talking about personality, I would say Finn, because Finn has, he's very humorous, even sometimes when he doesn't intend to be. I think Finn has a very boyish kind of charm. I think he's cool because he actually can do a lot of different things. Like, we haven't really seen a whole lot from Lando. Like, Lando was kind of, he was kind of cunning in a way, like the way he had his little iWatch or whatever that he was talking to Lobot with. But I mean, outside of that, like, I mean, he really didn't do much. Even when he rescued Han in, Return of the Jedi, I mean, he really didn't play a real huge pivotal role.
Well, true, but we do know that he's a really good pilot. We know that from the Solo movie, but we even know that from Return of the Jedi. Don't forget all of the battle, stuff he did. Yeah, the Battle of Endor.
True, but he kind of has that whole leadership quality in a way. But I think Finn, once he realizes what he's capable of, I think he'll ultimately end up being the cooler character in a sense. Because,
well, yeah, and I agree with you too, because I agree with you in the sense of, what do you mean by cool? Now, you're the one that actually wrote this topic. When we chose it, a lot of times we'll take turns, on who does this. This is Darryl. Darryl, you are the one that actually came up with the who's the cooler secondary character question. So my question to you then would be, what's your definition of cool in this case? What were you thinking?
Well, I guess my thought process is just who's cooler in the moment. Like, I think that ultimately I would probably pick Lando, just because Lando is a little bit more cunning and sure of himself.
Right. But I mean, what I'm saying though is, like, okay, when you thought of the thing, right? Because cool, you pointed out, could either be the whole swagger, suave, it could be the who's like a nicer, like who's cooler as far as like a more desirable personality type of thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's a really cool guy. I really like him. I want to hang out with him.
Well, and that's okay.
There's a third one though.
Oh.
Cool could be calm.
Well, either or. I think with all those, I still would say Lando, because Lando is cool in situations. He doesn't freak out much. Even like when he went against Vader, and he said, like, okay, this deal is keeping getting worse all the time. You could tell he was still thinking of a plan. Even how he had to, he's always trying to think a step ahead, whatever situation he's in. I think he's a cool person now just because like I said, he's confident. He's sure of himself. Finn is still nervous. He doesn't know who he is yet. He's still trying to figure out. I find it
hard to believe that this guy's a stormtrooper.
Yeah, well, I think and he's knowledgeable, and I think he has a lot of.
Well, yeah, he does, but he's anxious.
Yeah, he's anxious because he's always running. He's running from the situations all the time. Like and I think Rose brought that up in 8.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually, I mean, it was brought up a little bit by Maz and a little bit by Rey, even in 7. But I mean, it's a good point too, though. I actually like the fact that we actually explore a little bit more about a stormtrooper, and it somewhat humanizes them.
Yeah, it does.
You know, I mean, because nobody ever thinks about it. You think of stormtroopers as these, whether they're the clone versions or, you know, the clone troopers or actual stormtroopers like in the original trilogy where they were human.
Yeah, you think of it like mindless drones.
Yeah, they're like mindless drones, exactly.
Yeah.
Almost like robots or another variation of a droid, but these are real people with backgrounds.
Right.
And I think one of the things that, you know, the new movies as well as the new books and new comics do very successfully is they really humanize the people that were in the Empire or the First Order.
Yeah,
you know, depending on when these things are taking place. But yeah.
Yeah, even the villains, like, you get to see things from their perspective and you see why they think they're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not so much a
good guy, bad guy.
Yeah, good guy, bad guy, as much as it is, you know, their perspective versus, you know, the other person's perspective. And I think I agree with you, you know, talking about this, who's the cooler, because no matter what version of cool that you're thinking of, no matter what definition, Lando fits it.
Yeah.
He's definitely the more suave.
Definitely.
You know, I mean, he's definitely, well, I don't know. I mean, you could make the argument that, yeah, that Finn's like the nicer guy.
Yeah, he's more compassionate.
Yeah.
I would say. Because even like
or
when he
well, maybe.
Because even when he woke up like in 8, the first question he asked was, "Where's Rey?" Like he has.
Well, but if, you know, Calrissian had seen Rey, he probably would ask the same thing. You know, Rey's not exactly, you know, hard on the eyes.
Yeah, I mean, but I think he was always trying to protect her, and I felt like he developed. I mean, of course, we knew at first he was romantically attracted to her until she put him in the friend zone.
Yeah, and you know, now I think it really is going to be more of a brother sister type of thing.
Yeah, because now that he has Rose kind of in his corner now.
Then again, as we've seen from Luke and Leia, being a brother and sister doesn't necessarily mean anything in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
But you're right. He has Rose, and and Kelly Marie Tran is returning.
Yep.
For episode 9.
Yep.
So I personally think they're going to continue that. So I would say, yeah, Lando, he fits, you know, the definition, because I noticed when you wrote this that it wasn't who's the better secondary character or,
right.
You know, you chose cooler.
Yeah.
And, you know, you got to go with Lando on that. I mean, Lando's always been one of my favorites. I always thought he was kind of an underrated and underutilized in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's why I was glad to see. Maybe that's part of why I like Solo so much, because it opens that up a little bit.
I mean, you can even tell that, you know, Lando's even cooler because even when he wears Han's clothes at the end of the movie, he's still cool.
Yeah.
He takes his best friend's clothes.
I know. Like, what was up with that?
Hey,
I mean, no, don't get me wrong. I'm sure Han's got like, you know, 10 of those vests and shirts and stuff. But really, dude, you're going to go in there and start wearing the man's clothes?
Right. Don't you have like one of your capes you can throw on?
I mean, is this like revenge or something?
Hey.
You know, we're gonna
maybe he's going for a different look.
Yeah, we're gonna leave that alone. Now, in the last podcast, you almost forgot the name of our next segment. I'm still wanting to say topic. What is wrong with me?
It's Jedi mind trick,
I guess.
But yes, our next segment.
Yeah, I almost got you saying it.
Yeah, you did.
Hey, what is our next segment?
It is called From a Certain Point of View.
Ah, you got it, everybody.
So this segment is we're going to deal with how powerful will Kylo Ren and Rey be in episode 9.
Yeah, now that's a really, really good question. I mean, it's a good question on a number of fronts because it's so wide open. I mean, number one, they've both actually demonstrated a lot of power already.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's the thing, and I feel like I gotta preface this now because I think that a lot of people unfairly criticize the character of Kylo Ren. I actually think he's one of the coolest Star Wars characters that's come out in a long time, and I know how controversial it is to say that.
Right.
Because a lot of people found him annoying and, you know, even poorly written. But I think it's a great twist on the whole to come up with this Sith that's actually taking the whole idea of letting your emotions rule you to like the nth degree, basically. I mean, he's just like this unpredictable
loose cannon
that actually has a lot of power. I mean, when you really stop and think about the stuff he's already done, like when he stopped that laser bolt like in the midair and just held it there.
Yeah, while he's holding
this whole conversation.
Right.
And then just lets it go. And I mean, you know, then he has like his own, you know, variation of basically mind reading. He's literally using the Force to pull out thoughts, which is obviously very painful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I mean, he's already pretty powerful.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let me ask you this. Let's just deal with Kylo first.
Okay.
All right.
I'm a dark side guy anyway.
Yeah,
so.
you're the dark side guy anyway.
Yep.
And
let's go.
So here it is. Got to rub the hands together. We're gonna get down to this. Let's deal with Kylo first. So Kylo already has demonstrated a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think he's going to be able to do that he hasn't already shown?
Well, I think it depends. Well, even back to something that you said before, just a second ago, you know, you called him a Sith, and technically, I don't think not a Sith.
Hey, I said Sith-like character.
Okay.
Watch, I'll probably play this back. No, dude, you said Sith. Here.
Yep. But, I mean, the thing is, being a Sith, and that's...
Hashtag Eric said Sith. I could see it now.
But I think that Kylo, I think he's going to, once again, channel a lot of different things. I think that he's going to take some things from the Sith, and I think that he's going to take the good from it that he sees that he can use, and then kind of create his own thing out of it. What I would like to see I would love to see just raw power, you know, and I think we've seen glimpses of that, especially like when he dragged that one guy.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, but I mean,
to like how Snoke did
like
Hux.
That was just crazy.
Yeah.
Poor Hux, dude. I'd be wearing like armor. I'd come in there with like
football helmet and pads,
face mask at least.
Yeah, man.
But you know what? And that brings up a good point too, because when you really stop and think about it, I've never heard anybody say this before. I'm proud to be the first one on our podcast. Nobody has ever actually compared, at least to my knowledge, Kylo and Poe. Because if you think about The Last Jedi, they both are learning how to be leaders.
Yeah.
You know, they both, you know, so Poe's trying to be the hero. Kylo's trying to be like, this like villainous thing, but he doesn't know how to lead. You know, it's like Snoke was a villain and he was this powerful guy, but he knew how to lead.
Yeah, he was a strategist.
Yeah.
And he was powerful.
And he understood, you know, the subtleties of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And Kylo doesn't. Kylo's just this raw, powerful villain, much like how Poe was just this loose cannon, you know, somewhat powerful hero.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with Kylo, though, I think his evolution, and even you can tell that he's not as refined as you were, even by his lightsaber, because even the way it's constructed, you know, the blade isn't as smooth and crisp. It's jagged and rugged. And
I mean, you can make the argument that that's definitely...
And that's a part of his personality. It's almost like that comes through even in his weaponry.
You got to wonder if he did that on purpose. I mean, I know that's based on an older design.
Right.
You know, that they used to have. And I don't actually recall. I'm trying to think back of anything that I've read or anything about that particular crossguard design, if it had that, you know, that really rough...
jagged, you know,
kind of jagged blade to it, or if that's just him, who knows, being in a hurry or just using an inferior crystal or what.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see, his, and I think because he knows his lineage, but I think he's not going to rely on that. I think he knows. Okay,
oh yeah, I think The Last Jedi was the end of that. I mean, who knows though? I mean, I would love to see a scene of him going to Vader's castle on Mustafar.
Yeah, I think he wants to. I think he's no longer trying to impress anybody.
Yeah.
Because I think Snoke put that in his head. Like, okay, you could be the new Vader. I thought you were going to be this. I was going to, you know. But I think Kylo is just going to kind of come into his own and realize, and like I said in the other podcast, you know, about the Knights of Ren, like, I think that that's going to be his base. And then he's going to try to assemble his army to kind of do what he desires.
I hope so.
And now that Luke Skywalker is, in his mind, out of the picture, or so he thinks.
Well, and maybe he won't think that, because remember, you know, he's like, see you around, kid. I think what would actually be cool is that they had almost like a Force ghost like haunting and taunting him, because you've never really seen that. No. I mean, Obi-Wan would pop up at the most inopportune moments.
As long as it wasn't in the shower.
Yeah, in the shower or the bathroom, it'd be like, you know, Luke, it's just like, hey.
There's no warning.
Privacy here. Yeah, he just pops up like out of nowhere. You know, and then, of course, you know, Luke is like stranded on Hoth. He's like practically near death. And I'd be like, dude, are you going to, I don't know, send help? Or, I mean, I guess you can argue that maybe, and I've heard this theory before, that Obi-Wan actually guided Han to him. And hey.
Maybe.
You know, I mean, and that's not even a stretch. I could see that, because if you really think about that scene, you know, when Obi-Wan is vanishing, Han's like in that.
He's appearing.
Yeah, he's appearing. So
yeah.
Now, well, what about Rey? How powerful do you think Rey? Because here's another example. She's really, you know, there's a lot of people that accuse her character of having way too much power too early. And again, it's one of those things that I can understand it. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, in the sense of you can explain a lot of the things that she does in the context of the scenes. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, look at the way that she was with the lightsaber. And it's like she was kind of clumsy with the lightsaber in 7.
Yeah.
You know, taking wild swings. It wasn't like she was some great warrior or anything.
I mean, even in 8, I mean, look, the caretakers were almost getting taken out by her, man, because she was always knocking over stones, blasting through the.
She was definitely she had a clumsiness to her. And then, you know, I mean, even when she would use these force powers, like when she, you know, tried to trick the Daniel Craig stormtrooper into letting her out, it didn't work right away.
Right.
You know, so I mean, I think she has a natural ability, and sometimes when she's just like at peace and concentrating, she can see that. But
yeah, and I think that's one of the things about power is that, you know, a person has to be able to control themselves.
Yeah,
and that's the beautiful part about watching these two grow in the Force, is because they have natural ability. They have natural talent, but, you know, you have to, and even in Empire, you know, he said, well, you know, Luke said it like, you know, but I can feel the Force. He's like, but you can't control it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the pivotal things that people have to understand, is that with any type of power, whether you're talking about the Force or just even in everyday life, you know, like some people, you hear the term, people don't know their own strength sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of those things where, until you really get to gauge and understand how and when to do things, then you can move more strategically, and you know when. And that's the cool thing about Vader, because Vader was super powerful, but, you know, he didn't have to use a whole lot. Palpatine, super powerful, but, you know, every now and then, okay, he'll let out. He'll raise the electric bill every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we didn't see a lot of, and I think a lot of the things that you have to really take into consideration too is the fact that because we've had a lot of these movies, books, companion stuff, there's expectations, I think, that are created now. Mm-hmm. You know, because if you think about it, Luke at a young age used the Force without even realizing it, but we didn't see that on film.
Right.
You know, I mean, he would talk about bullseyeing womp rats and, you know, doing all this stuff that, you know, and they would allude to the fact that he was this just crazy good pilot that...
Yeah, he had amazing reflexes.
Sort of unnatural in a way. Okay, but we didn't see that. Right. We just heard about it. And Star Wars is new.
Well, even A New Hope. I mean, before... You know, I mean, he was still surviving before even Obi-Wan took him out. I mean, you got to think about it. Like, here's this farm boy who's in a cockpit of an X-Wing, and he's flying around in the trenches of a Death Star, against military trained pilots, and he's taking them out, and he's surviving against these guys without any formal training.
Yeah. And then the thing that you and I are talking about too is that, he switches his targeting computer off, and it's, they're kind of like, hey man,
yeah,
you're kind of our last shot at this. You maybe want to put that thing back on, or
at least let us know what you're doing.
Or do you have some other guidance system in there? And, what if Luke had said, you know what? No, and the funny thing
is, my dead mentor is talking to me.
My dead mentor. Right. I'm hearing voices in my head, guys. We're good. It's okay. Remember that Jedi thing that went out of the universe like 20 or 30 years ago? Yeah, it's good. But the thing that's really funny about that scene is, he's basically like, I got this. No, I'm okay. And they're just like,
all right,
okay, cool.
To some degree, you kind of don't want to rattle the last guy, like, all right, well, if maybe he sees something out there.
Well, I would say normally that would be the case, except you're about to get hit by this giant turbo laser wiped out of existence. I think I would probably maybe fight a little. I wouldn't try to rattle him, but I would certainly maybe try to make a case or something.
Right, ask a few more questions.
Well, could you, you're going to do whatever you're going to do in there, buddy, but could you at least put the computer back on? It would make me feel better.
Yeah, we would feel better if you would just turn this thing back on.
Because they're just looking at that giant, bowl-shaped map thing or whatever, just kind of at the mercy of whatever this guy does.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so, his power, is demonstrated by the fact that he hits it, and
yeah, that's
cool. But I think because we've had all these years and all this Star Wars stuff, there's expectations now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if people do things that are outside of those expectations, it interferes with that suspension of disbelief.
Well, and that's why I look at people when they, criticize like Rey for having too much power, is because okay, well, like I said, look what Luke was doing, even in A New Hope. And, and it's just like, okay, he took on this huge, huge mission that he was by all means pretty ill-equipped for.
Oh, completely.
But but he got the job done, and then of course.
Well, but here's the thing, and this is what I think the biggest difference and maybe why some criticism takes place is because if you look at every instance, up until, you know what? You can even include when he shoots the photon torpedoes, because even then, okay, he's by himself in the cockpit, but he's got Obi-Wan guiding him.
Yeah, well, he just told him to trust his feelings.
Yeah, but still somebody giving him something.
True.
And then he's had help along all the way. The whole time he had Han Solo, Chewbacca, Leia, the droids. Everybody's providing some help. Rey is just doing this essentially on her own.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the reason why it's a little harder is that, she's demonstrating some things that even though Luke did the same thing, one, we didn't see it. We didn't see a lot of it. And two, it's easier to believe that Luke kind of got into a lot of this stuff because he had all these people around him that were helping him. He wasn't doing it by himself.
True, but the thing to Rey, and, she's heard the stories, and people recanting tales and things of how. And so I think she was kind of gleaning more, and she knew what she had in her. She just didn't know really how to control it, but she knew it was there. And I think she just went off things that she had heard and just like, well I guess I'll try it.
And here's the argument I usually make, because, I say all this, but I actually do defend Rey's use of all this power.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that everybody forgets that she grew up on Jakku being left there as a little girl, and she's had to basically fend for herself.
Yeah.
When everybody talks about, how does she have all this fighting skills? It's like, well, did you see her with her staff?
Exactly.
She took down essentially a First Order stormtrooper when Finn attacked. Well, he didn't even attack. She ran up on him.
Yeah, she chased him down. But the other thing, too, about Rey is that, people keep forgetting that it's, the Force guides you. And people just don't.
Yeah, it's the will of the Force.
It's
like
the will of the
Snoke said, darkness rise, light rises to meet it. The Force definitely has something to do with it.
Yeah, and so and even Obi-Wan, is like, it doesn't just tell you what to do, but also obeys your commands too. So it's kind of like, if you have that stronger connection, then it stands to reason that some things come a little bit more natural.
I think that's the reason why everybody's obsessed with Rey's lineage.
Right.
Because everybody's wondering, like, okay, where does this now? Of course, The Last Jedi attempts to explain this by saying, look, there's people strong in the Force everywhere. They're not all tied to a Skywalker, Palpatine, Obi-Wan, whatever.
Right.
And that makes sense. Well, all right, let's close out this segment.
All right.
And get to our next one.
Well, our next segment is our questions, which we like to call Clear Your Mind. Clear your mind of questions.
Clear your mind.
This is the part where we take questions from you all and we try to answer them to the best of our ability, and we try to have some, cool discussions about it.
Yeah, and that's basically what it is, because sometimes, I don't even know if we're really going to definitively answer some of these. It's just really cool discussion topics. So who's our first? Looks like we got Dave Cossey.
Yeah. Dave Cossey writes, what are your thoughts on film viewing order for those who are new to the franchise? I have talked about the merits of the three methods to folks who have asked me: chronological release, the episode number order, and the Machete Method. Any other variants that are worth mentioning?
Well, before we talk about any other variants worth mentioning, maybe we should explain this Machete Method to people that might not be familiar with this. So basically, they suggest watching 4 and 5, right? Then 2 and 3, then like 6. Yeah, and and then following. And the reason for that is their whole idea is the story's not really about Anakin. Anakin is just more like, the idea is redeeming Anakin is analogous to redeeming the universe.
All right.
So pretty much, if you save Anakin from the dark side, you're actually saving the galaxy from the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on this, what they suggest, this Machete Method, and the reason why they do this is
because
you're chopping out 1,
right,
and you're taking 2 and 3, and essentially what you're doing is, after Empire Strikes Back, Episode 5, when Darth Vader reveals that he's actually Luke's father, Anakin, you now treat 2 and 3 as almost like a giant flashback scene that shows how this is true. And then when you watch 6 and it picks it up, it actually makes sense. And then the reason why they say don't even worry about 1 isn't because, they're suggesting it's a bad movie. It's because there's nothing really in 1 that furthers this story or is critical to it. So that's, for those who don't know, that's the Machete Method.
Yeah, and then the episodic order is basically like episode 1, 2, 3, all the way up to currently 8. And then the chronological order would be how they were actually released in theater. So it would be episode 4, 5, and 6, then the prequels 1, 2, and 3, followed by the sequels 7 and 8.
Yeah.
So which is your preferred method? If you were to tell some novice kid who's like, okay, I keep hearing about Star Wars, I really want to sit down and watch this because it's like a big part of pop culture that I should know, what order would you tell them to watch them?
I mean, it's a really difficult decision because, as you know, one of the things, our tagline says 2 fans, 2 generations, all things Star Wars. Well, one of the things that when we came up with the idea of this podcast, in fact, we almost called it Star Wars Generations, but there's a Star Trek movie by the same name, so we didn't really want to
confuse people. And
plus, just calling it Generations is a little vague.
Yeah.
So, but the idea, though, is that we're 2 generations of Star Wars fans. As, people can learn in our About Us, be sure to visit our website, head-to-head, swpodcast.com.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, shameless plug. Sorry, guys. In our About Us, you learn that when I came up, I actually remember what life was like before Star Wars. I saw the original Star Wars film, which later became A New Hope, right? But that was like on its 2nd or 3rd theatrical run. And that was 1977. I was like 7 years old. Darryl, of course, came on late 80s, early 90s after the original trilogy was done. So this is a really good question for you and I, because in a way, well, I mean, it's still really, even with you, the original trilogy, you still became a Star Wars fan long before the prequels were out. So
right.
I would actually suggest they do the 4, 5, and 6, and then 1, 2, and 3. I would actually do it chronologically.
Okay.
I mean, because here's another thing, and this is something that, now Dave says, are there any other variants worth mentioning? I would say, yeah. I would say episodic number order mixed with the standalones, because if you go 1, 2, 3, then Rogue One, or actually you could go 1, 2, 3 solo Rogue One, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
True. That's very true.
And even though that would give you a complete picture, the only reason why I would say is you have to remember that the prequels were even made by Lucas in order to give the original trilogy more depth. And I think that it functions best that way. Because the original trilogy, let's face it, they were the most well-made of all the films.
Indeed.
And I think that can you imagine? I mean, don't get me wrong, I actually like Episode 1. Like, I like The Phantom Menace, but that's not a movie I would use to try to get people into Star Wars.
Okay. So, which is still your preferred method is?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the chronological order, simply because, and again, this part of this could be colored because it's the way I saw them.
Right.
But I will say that I actually did watch them in chronological order, before actually we both did when we went and saw that massive marathon.
Yeah.
When 7 was released. That was tough.
That was insane.
That was fun, but that was tough.
Fun, but insane.
I mean, aside from the women in the R2-D2 lingerie and the Chewbacca onesies, that made it a little bit more palatable, but, and, the endless trips to the concession stand. But hey, there's only so much popcorn and pop that you can, or soda for all you people that are outside the Midwest. It was tough, but that was a way that you and I got to see it theatrically in chronological.
Episodic order.
Episodic order.
Right.
And there is some merit to that. Now, I've never tried the Machete Method. I've known about it, but I've never tried it.
You should do that one day.
Yeah, that would be actually fun. We should do that. We should experiment with that and report back to everybody and give everybody their thoughts. But what is your preferred order?
I actually preferred the episodic order.
Well, I kind of figured that just by your reactions. Like, is that your final answer? So you're sure you want to say chronological? Because last chance.
I think the episodic order, just because we saw them because we had to see them that way. You know what I mean? But I feel like now when you actually have the complete picture, I think it makes more sense to people when you, and of course, because we're such fans of the originals, of course, we're going to understand everything that came before it. But if you're talking to someone who's completely brand new, I think from the beginning all the way through, it would just be the best way for them to understand. Of course, they're going to notice the big differences as far as cinematography and all that. Well, but I mean, the story itself.
No, I get it. But let me ask you this. Have you ever, how many people, first of all, let's do this. How many people have you actually, gotten into Star Wars and actually had to do this?
I've done it quite a few times. I've had a few friends who are like, okay, they know I'm a huge Star Wars fan and they're trying to, or I've been in relationships and, the women are like, okay, I've never seen a Star Wars movie and I'm just looking at you.
Yeah,
like,
and
this
then
is automatically not going to work.
Right. After you contemplate breaking up with them, once you decide, okay, maybe I'm going to stick it out and give this woman a chance. But so here's the question then. Of all these people now,
Have you tried all the? Well, I mean, obviously the Machete Method.
I've never done the Machete Method, but I've done the chronological and the episodic. I've done both.
Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to make this like a story problem, but now of the times that you've done both, how many would you say you've done the episodic versus the chronological?
I think they were about even.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, about even.
Which one do you think got the best response? Now, I know what your preferred method is, but which way do you think got the best response?
I think they got the better response with episodic, simply because of this. One, I think episodic had more action for them, so they were more engaged, and that allowed them to get into the story more. Then once they kind of like saw the action, and they're like, okay, so they've heard and they know who Darth Vader. I mean, people know who he is, but to see how he became this guy was like cool to them, because like, okay, he started off as this little kid, and then, you know, he's going through these tribulations, and then he gets seduced, and now he's this evil guy, and now he's kind of like regretting it. And then now you see him like, okay, now you understand the redemption of him, because you understand still where he came from.
Yeah.
So now they understand, like, and even though it's not as, you know, the lightsaber duels aren't as fast and spectacular as it was in the prequels.
Yeah, you're just saying it gives it more context.
It gives them context because now, okay, because if you just watch from the chronological perspective, Vader shows up in the scene. Okay, he finds out, you know, that Luke's his father. Okay, well, who was Vader even with to have a kid? You know what I'm saying? He doesn't even seem like the guy that he would even
it's like,
have a kid.
How does that work in
how does it? Yeah, exactly. It's like,
I have to admit, I thought that.
Yeah, it's just like,
I was like 10 years old, but I'm like, really? How does that work? Can you?
Yeah, like, all right, there's some kind of like latch or something. You know, but
all right, well, okay, episodic. You know.
I think episodic was the better for them, for someone who's coming in brand new, because now they get the complete picture.
Okay, you know, next week when I have the new co-host, well, you know. No, I mean, and you know what? I mean, I've done the same thing. I've done both, because here's what I do. And here's going to be my final answer. Your final answer is episodic, and that makes sense. My final answer is it depends on the person. Because it depends to me on how they would best receive Star Wars, you know, and I have to guess on that a lot of times. But that's generally what I do, because, you know, I actually enjoy seeing them in episodic order. Mm-hmm. In fact, I want to try once all this stuff comes out. I want to, you know, once Solo comes out on, you know, on Blu-ray or whatever, digital. Because actually I bought Last Jedi in digital. I didn't even buy the actual physical disc. Gotcha. But I want to actually try watching them in like super episodic order, where it's like you literally now are fitting the standalone films in with those things. And I mean, if you really want to go crazy, you'd throw like Rebels in there before Rogue One, and, you know, you'd start incorporating some of the, you know, the animated series and
You're right.
things
if you
like
wanted
that.
To, get super detailed.
Yeah. All right. So who do we got next?
The next question comes from John Reinhardt. Should future films focus more on the continuation of storylines or the explanation of past events, kind of like Solo and Rogue One were? So that's kind of like...
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And that kind of lends back to the last question we just
Yeah, it really
answered,
does.
Really.
It really does. We're really good at putting shows together, people.
Masters.
This was completely by accident.
It's the will of the Force.
That's just right.
So that's a kind of a hard one, because on one hand...
Oh, for you, maybe.
It's cool because...
That wasn't antagonistic or anything.
But I think that, you know, the continuation of the story, on one hand, is cool. But I do like expansion. I think in some ways, like, for example, I love Rogue One. I thought Rogue One was...
Honestly, Rogue
awesome.
One is actually one of my, I mean, it's not only is it one of my favorite Star Wars movies, but it's, I mean, granted, there's only been 2 of the standalone films, but I mean, I thought that Rogue One is the template by which they should base all, you know, standalone films.
Yeah, and I think that even though we knew the events because the story, we knew the events that happened in Rogue One prior to Rogue One coming to film. But the way it was shot, it took us to new worlds. It introduced us to new characters.
In a way, it kind of,
while still joining.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So it kind of gave
in a way, it continued the storyline while giving you the explanation of past events.
Exactly. And
because you could actually now, I mean, granted, they pretty much killed off everybody in Rogue One, so it might not be the best example. But there were characters, let's say, in Rogue One that you could actually do secondary spin-off movies on. And if they hadn't killed them off, like let's just say Krennic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Krennic survived.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, they could then continue on with him. So even though Rogue One technically is a movie that is explaining past events, you could actually do a continuation storyline beyond.
Yeah.
You know, they could even do that. You know, they could easily do that with some of the other characters. I'll give you actually a character from the books, Rey Sloane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she started out, she was actually introduced in New Dawn, and she lasts all the way through the Aftermath trilogy. And she actually has like this long tenure through pretty much all the books. She'll pop up and in these crazy, you know, like you wouldn't even expect her to be in it, and she's in it. And she's around the time of the Battle of Jakku, because that's when, you know, all that stuff takes place. Now, what happens to her beyond that, I'm trying to remember, because it was a while ago that I read it. But I mean, that's an example of you can take her and just go, okay, well, where is she now? Like during the events of episode 9 or something.
Right.
But now I notice in John's question, it's not should they focus on the continuation of the storyline or the explanation, it's should they focus more? So, and that's really what honestly really makes this tough. I'm going to say 50-50.
Yeah, because I mean, and I agree with you because there's certain parts, and like you and I have had this conversation about, because fans have been asking about an Obi-Wan movie.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the events that were going on between episode 4, between
3 and 4.
3 and 4, and what Obi-Wan was doing then. And I'm really not all that interested in that. Although, you know, some people have made cases that you could tell a bunch of different stories about.
But somebody, he means me, everybody.
Wasn't saying any names. But I just feel like it kind of takes away from his whole purpose, because if he's there to watch over Luke, then I just feel like that's where he should be. And granted, yeah, he could do stuff, I guess, on Tatooine, but...
Well, I think what you're trying to say is, you know, you don't have to over-explain everybody.
Yeah, I think some stories... You know? Now, Rogue One was cool because it answered a lot of different things.
That actually filled in a lot of much-needed gaps. I would like to see the Obi-Wan movie, even trilogy, because... One, I really love the character a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's just a lot that you can tell between where we leave him on 3 and 4. But that said, I also didn't think the Han Solo origin story was necessary. Now, I liked the movie a lot, but if you ask me, did I need it? No, I didn't need it. You know, and that's the thing. And so I think that they need to strike, like, for instance... If you told me that there was a Palpatine origin story coming out, I'd be more excited about that than in episode 10.
What about Leia? Because like the book Bloodline gave a lot of context to who Leia, but
the book Princess Leia or something, I keep forgetting. You know, I'm really behind on these novels. I've really, you know, for up until the release of episode 8, I was on them. I had read every single book that came out, but for some reason, you know, like Phasma I didn't read yet. And I mean, they're coming out with
a bunch of other ones, or so I'm hearing. I'm sure we'll announce them on future podcasts, but they're really starting to release a lot more novels now. And it's like, I'm still on last shot. Even since the last podcast, I haven't touched it. I really got to get moving on these. But
work does happen.
there is a Princess Leia origin novel that talks about her teen years.
Right.
In fact, it's talking about why is this so embarrassing?
Wasn't her rise on Alderaan?
Yeah, but I mean, it's oh man, the character in Last Jedi. Oh, this is so embarrassing.
You talking about the lady with the Lorna Dern's character?
Yeah.
Holdo.
Yeah, that's it. They actually talk about. That's why a lot of fans didn't like Laura Dern's portrayal of her, because it was vastly different from the way her character was in the book. And so they basically explained it away by saying, well, as a teenager, almost like kind of like the Han Solo type of thing. When they're younger, there's a little bit more bubbliness and whatever. And then after you go through a lot, well, then, naturally
you become more hardened.
Yeah, there's some changes, and there's a lot of truth to that. But the thing is that the novels do that really well. They really enrich the Star Wars universe really well. And I've often said, even back in the days of Legends, like, man, there's a lot of Legends books at the time. In fact, the infamous Timothy Zahn trilogy. I remember when they first announced Episode 7 and that they were going to make a new trilogy, I was like, oh, are they going to actually do the Timothy Zahn trilogy as films? I would have loved to have seen that.
Oh, yeah, that would have been dope.
So, I mean, it just comes down to, I think that it's necessary to actually go back and do some backstory type of stuff or maybe fill in gaps in between movies or something, because it really does enrich the whole and enhance, in my opinion, the whole Star Wars universe. But at the same time, you do have to continue and also expand the universe at the same time.
Well, let me ask you this question, and it's kind of a tie into this. So, and I think the novels are a great asset when you're looking to get more in depth on a particular character, because you can do a lot more in a book or a series of books. So like Han Solo series.
The comics do the same thing.
So what would determine something being a book versus being a movie?
Well, I mean, the sad thing is, I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, because like every book that I have read, I would love to see as a movie. Lords of the Sith, love to see it as a movie. Bloodline, love to see it as a movie. I mean, I think if you wanted to start getting into, I guess like stuff that's more, informational, that wouldn't necessarily translate well on film. That'd be one.
Okay.
A second criteria for book versus movie would be maybe something that isn't 100% like wouldn't appeal to an really broad audience. Something that's just like really, like for instance, I'll give you an example. There was a book in Legends called Tales of Mos Eisley. Now, it was a collection of short stories about different things that happened in Mos Eisley, in the Cantina, Jabba's palace.
Right.
Some of the stuff, that's actually the whole infamous story about where Boba Fett got out of the Sarlacc pit. That came from that. Now, there are certain things in there that were really interesting, but I wouldn't necessarily make a movie out of it.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, it would have to be the only thing that would make the difference between book and movie is pivotal moment. So, for example, like you brought up Lords of the Sith, I think that should be a movie simply because that's a pivotal moment in time, because that's when Vader is making his ascension to becoming the most, feared man in the galaxy, basically. But it also chronicles like his relationship with the Emperor and how that having that knowledge is kind of like, okay, you can see the trials and tribulations and how Vader is dealing with these situations and how he's become the most feared person in the galaxy. So when you see him you understand why people have such a reverence for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when it fills in necessary gaps, like you want to find out, well, why? That's why, even though some people wouldn't necessarily care for it, or they would want to see it more in an Old Republic thing, I think a Yoda origin story would be appropriate.
Absolutely. Because
it's like, why is this guy so powerful, and how did he get that way, and why does everybody
listen to him?
Yeah. And then even, even the Emperor feared him.
Yeah, even the movie, the book, Bloodline. Like, I think that's a great...
Yeah, that's really good pivotal.
It's pivotal because...
Especially to the new trilogy.
To the new trilogy, because when the galaxy finds out that Leia is the daughter of Darth Vader, who was once the...
Yeah, they weren't happy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but then she's this high political figure.
Well, the thing that's amazing about that, too, is just like it's an instant turn, and it's like the way they handled it was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
and those are
I agree.
Pivotal moments where it's just like that shifts a lot of different things in the world. So
yep. All right. Well, let's end our show with a fun question. This one comes from David Damon.
Okay.
This is a fun question.
Go for it.
All right. Is Jar Jar a Jedi or Sith, or as stupid as he appears to be? Now, I think I could be wrong. David, you can always write in and correct me. I'm actually inviting that a lot. I probably shouldn't say that all the time. But basically, I think that this is coming from this whole theory that a fan came up with about how Jar Jar is actually a Sith. Like, he's the ultimate Sith Lord, and, he was playing dumb, and it's funny because if you actually read through this guy's thing, it's very compelling. Like, it's believable, and you almost wish it were true. Now, I will say that even though we know the answer is he's just as dumb as he appears to be, there is it Life Debt? I think it's in the Aftermath trilogy, and I believe it's in Life Debt. I think it's in the second book of the trilogy where they actually have a scene with Jar Jar where he's essentially like a clown performing at parties type of thing. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is, now Ahmed Best, recently revealed that, he almost killed himself.
Yeah.
And that he, and he's been starting to open up more and more. He's been doing more and more interviews, and I guess somewhere there's an interview or something where he actually reads that passage from the book in Jar Jar's voice. Like, he actually acts it out in a way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. He's really been a good sport about, a lot of the fan criticism that he's gotten over the years. And, even though it really bugged him, and let's face it, he almost killed himself over it. Mm-hmm. He actually came out the other side, and people are starting to embrace him, because all the people that everybody has to remember that when Phantom Menace came out and Jar Jar was created, no different than when we grew up with Star Wars, it was really made for kids.
Right.
It's just that we grew up and we kept loving it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we were all like little kids, okay, now that, we're all in our 20s, 30s, 40s or whatever, well, now we want a Star Wars that appeals to that.
Right.
But the problem is, George, when he made episodes 1, 2, and 3, is like, no, you guys remember when you were like 10 years old and watching these? Well, now this is for those 10-year-olds.
Yeah, it's for like young teens, basically.
Yeah. And so what happened is, now you have people, who might have been like, say, 10 years old in 99.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost 30.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're coming up and they're appreciative of, a lot of things that maybe fans from our generation weren't so cool with. I thought that Jar Jar was just overdone in the Phantom Menace. I didn't necessarily have a problem with the character. I just wish that he wasn't through the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
But, he
he's not a Jedi. He's not a Sith. He's just a Gungan. So, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Well, to quote Darth Vader, he's clumsy as he is stupid.
Yeah. There is that one Robot Chicken episode. Remember that one where Jar Jar ended up being a Force ghost and like haunted him?
Oh man, that was hilarious.
That was awesome. And if you guys haven't checked out any of the Robot Chicken, Star Wars spoofs, they're hilarious. Just absolutely brilliant. They're brilliantly done and they're hilarious.
But I mean, to answer the question quickly, yeah, he's just stupid.
That was quick.
Yeah. I think that, and you're absolutely correct. Like, Jar Jar was never meant to be anything more than just comedic relief. Yeah. I think that, at the time George was trying to appeal to a wider audience or a younger audience at that time, because like I said, I believe that Star Wars, even the original trilogy, was more catered to young teens. So I'm talking about 12, 13, 14-year-olds on up. But I think that he was trying to capture younger audiences, like 7, 8 years old. And, Jar Jar is that goofy, and I think he could have done a lot of the humor with the droids, as he's always done. But I think Jar Jar kind of represented that off-kiltered humor that, almost borderline potty humor that, little kids kind of like.
He's essentially Jim Carrey as an alien.
Yeah, essentially. So yeah, I think that, I think he, and like, I agree with you. Like, if he wasn't, they could have ditched him after 1. Like, after episode 1, they could have been like, all right, bye, Jar Jar. But so why was he in 2 and 3? And they try to give him these political positions, like, and then,
well, the other thing too is that, I will say this to David, where even though he wasn't a Jedi or a Sith, right? Let's not forget that he's the one that put Palpatine in power.
Yeah. Yeah. He was the deciding vote.
It wasn't like he didn't have a pivotal role, really.
Yeah. But it was just, that's what, and I guess they needed somebody to kind of make, pull the trigger on that, I guess. And who better than the dumb Gungan, but, yeah, Jar Jar is just clumsy and stupid. But, I will say my best played him perfectly.
Yeah, you can't blame.
I can't blame the actor.
He actually did a brilliant job, and he did an amazing, brilliant job. At what he was given, and a lot of times that's the problem: is people blame actors when really it's the writer and the director that actually a lot of the blame should fall on. Because a lot of times an actor's going to do what they're asked to do. The director tells them how to play a part, or how to do a scene or whatever. It's like they're going to do it. And then, of course, everybody's at the mercy of the script.
Yep.
So it's like, you can only do what you have. And if you're asked to do some, hey, make this really silly. Because here's a little bit of trivia. Michael Jackson actually wanted to play Jar Jar.
Wow. Not
only did he want to voice him, he actually wanted to be the motion capture. Michael Jackson lobbied George Lucas to play Jar Jar Binks.
Wow. Well, I guess after playing the Scarecrow and the Wiz, hey.
Not much of a stretch.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, on that note, we are going to leave you. Remember to follow us on Twitter and to like us on Facebook.
Yes.
Both sites, not hashtag, at head-to-head SW. And this is where you could submit questions. All these questions that these people are asking us, submit them there. Or just come up with some discussion topics or anything you guys, whatever's on your mind.
Absolutely. Well, I had a great time once again. This is always fun.
Always. Always fun. So, all right. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
And may the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.